Awesome. So I'm going to pull up our presentation for today because today's session is all about measuring and managing impact. And impact can mean a number of different things. I just realized I didn't introduce myself while we were doing our introductions before we started the recording. So most of you know me. My name is Carolyn Keller, and I'm the founder of Curio 412. We're a development and impact management consultancy that helps organizations leave a lasting impact. And one of the ways that we do that is by helping them learn a little bit more about what their impact looks like and which metrics are most important to measure. So today, we've tried to design a session that's going to help equip you to use some data-driven decision-making to plan, organize, and implement whatever impact means for your organization. We've all used key performance indicators or key performance metrics in our day-to-day lives, whether that's a personal goal or it's something that we do through our work. And these goals usually, these KPIs usually help us to meet those goals, measure success, see where we are along the lines. And when we want to make a difference in our community, having KPIs that ensure we measure what matters and meet the goals that we have for the community are just as important as it would be in your day-to-day work life. And so that's why the goal for today's session is to have you walking away with a better understanding of how to understand and measure and manage impact that you have. A little bit of background about me. Started my business and have been doing it kind of very casually for a while and launched officially on my own of August of last year. Very purpose-driven as to helping organizations, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, figure out the best way that they can make a difference in their community. I've been in the social sector for nearly a decade, so I've seen a number of different organizations and their struggles. And one of the things that I noticed when I was working in organizations, and I started out in the museum field, went into more broadly the education side of the nonprofit area, social sector, and what I saw every step of the way was that organizations, we'd get to the end of a year and we'd either look to put our annual report together, or we'd think about writing a new grant, and we'd think about the information that we need, and oftentimes the data points or stories or whatever we use to measure impact, we hadn't been tracking it along the way. And so that's kind of what drove me to start the business that I have now, is to help organizations so that when they get to the end of their year or they're looking to further their mission, whether that's trying to gain funds, reach out to volunteers or donors, or even just write an annual report that has meaningful information, that they're equipped with the materials that they need to do that. And I always start like this with the question of what is impact, because I'm sure that impact can mean a number of different things and does mean a number of different things to you and your organization. So I know that we have our chat live here. If you want to think about what impact means to you, what impact means to your organization, I'd love to see you type it in the chat as I talk a little bit more about how I think about impact. When I say I do impact management as a consultant, people often ask, well, what do you do? And when I think about impact as being change in people's lives. And that can be a change for the better or for the worse. And it's important for us to understand whether we're having an impact that is for the better or the worse. So this process of figuring out what those metrics are that matter, and then using that data to plan, organize, and implement impact with a measurable outcome in mind is how I see impact, because it can be so many different things. And as I explained earlier, working with organizations that didn't always have a clear path to understanding their impact got me thinking that there has to be a better way to start to manage. So I started to look at different methods that would produce those intentional and measurable outcomes, and started applying those to different scenarios with organizations. And so through a mix of these methods, that's how I developed this process of impact management, which I'm going to share a little bit of with you today. And it helps to centralize impact within an organization so that its programs and services can really benefit from the work that you do and the items that you decide to measure. What I always think about here is, why does impact matter? Why do we need to ensure that impact is centered in our organization? Because clearly, if we're doing the work and we're doing it well, we have to be having an impact, right? And what I always say is that understanding and measuring impact is no good unless you can utilize it strategically. You can use it internally to drive goals and set objectives for your organization. You can use it as a baseline so that you can start tracking what you're doing and scale your success. And you can also use it to cultivate support from stakeholders. So when stakeholders are able to see that you have that sort of baseline that's able to be scaled and able to grow, they're much more willing to understand that through demonstrating that and their support, you could grow even further. And so that's where this understanding and measuring your impact comes into play, is having the data necessary and having the information necessary to be able to not only set your own internal goals, but then share those goals and accomplishments with others as well. So we're going to do this presentation in two different portions. One's on the measuring side, and then the other's on the managing side. So we're going to start with measuring here. So when you think about measuring and you think about your organization, some of you have typed in the impact that you want to have, whether it's things like connecting with your audiences, from Rob at the or Bob at the Heinz History Center, or Alyssa about how we affect the lives of others. Thinking about your organization and what change do you want to make? The reason I start with this question is because you need to understand the change you want to make in order to figure out what metrics are really important to that change that you want to make. And when I talk with organizations, we usually start with the why of their organization. So if you have an organization that wants to really reduce food insecurity or financial stress on, say, cancer survivors, that's a change that you want to make. How are you going to get there? How are you going to scale it? What's important to all of those pieces to reducing food insecurity or ensuring that there is lessened financial stress? So thinking about it in terms of, I see a problem, what is the solution that I want to have? What is the change that I want to make in this situation? Can really help you to start to think about what all has to happen before that change occurs. And like I said, I usually ask organizations what their why is. This comes from Simon Sinek, who is a business development thinker. And one of the things that he says about corporate organizations is usually corporate organizations know what they do and they know how they do it. And they try to build their messaging off of what and how. And they work their way from the outside of this, what he calls the golden circle, into the why. So they'd say maybe we are a coffee shop that creates freshly ground coffee every day, but they don't really say much about why they do that every day. So there's a portion where if you reverse this and work from why, and I know there are a number of organizations that have some sort of purpose driven at the center, but say you're a, we'll use the coffee example, say you're a coffee shop and your proceeds go to veterans. And so your why isn't just to make coffee and sell, fresh grounds every day. Your why is to help veterans get to a better place. And so if you start with, we are a veteran-owned and operated business that wants to change the lives of people, and we do this by creating coffee and opportunities for people to come together, then you have a more compelling reason for people to come to your organization. In order to start to create this messaging for yourself, you might want to ask yourself two questions. The first is, what is the specific contribution that your organization makes to the lives of others? And then the second question is, what does your contribution allow others to do or be? So the first question asks that broad question of the specific contribution. So it's getting into focus how your organization makes that change, and what are the ways in which your organization operates in order to change the lives of others. And then the second question here is really focused on outcomes. What does it allow others to be? How does it move other people forward? And so use both of these questions to really dig into that a little bit more. And you can do this independently with yourself, or if you have a committee or board of directors that you work with and want to gain good conversation and generate good conversation, maybe bring these two questions to your next board meeting, next committee meeting, and see what kind of answers you get. And if you have answers that sometimes you'll have answers that are all over the place and you realize, wow, we do so many things, and where are the commonalities and how can we really tighten this in and focus it in? Other times you might find that everyone's on the same page and you can create a really compelling statement. So starting with this why is going to help you to understand not only the impact you want to have on others, but also the way in which you're going to accomplish that. And both of those things are going to contribute to understanding your impact and how you're going to measure it. So we always want to make sure that we're measuring what matters. And to do that, we have to think about outcomes. Outcomes are that result that we want to achieve or the conditions of well-being that we want. I'm sure that none of your organizations wake up every morning and think that you're not going to have a positive outcome on the people that you serve. You always want to have that positive outcome. You want to know that your organization is doing a good job. So when you think about those outcomes, you're going to want to think about it in terms of what evidence do we have that this outcome is happening? And then you'll want to track that. So when you measure conditions, you can establish those baselines, as I said, to learn what success looks like. These baselines are what the measures show about what you've been doing and where you're headed. And if you can establish a good set of baselines about the outcomes that you want to achieve, you can also understand what success looks like if you do better than where you are now. If you're able to, say, serve more people or reach a wider geographic area, or maybe it's impacting individuals or families more deeply. There are always a number of different things that could come from these outcomes or those results that you want to achieve. And that's the first step to thinking about measuring what matters, is having that outcomes focus. So now that your organization has a good sense of how you change people's lives, the specific contributions that you make, then thinking about those outcomes is that next step. So this is just a quick question. You can type it in the chat, or if you want to give me a thumbs up yes or thumbs down no. Do you track your organization's impact? I'm sure we'll have a number of different answers. You can even put your thumb in the middle if you think the answer is maybe. Yes and no. Seeing from the chat. Some, yeah, some and some. Okay. So what I've come to find, for the most part, that there is a lot of people that hang out in this sort of area. This, you know, we track some things, but we don't track other things, or we could be doing a better job. There are very few people that say they don't track anything, because I think most of us know that we want to track something that we're going to have to, you know, when I talked to Ron before we started this recording about Westinghouse Shore, he told me that they have over 1,200 people who are volunteers within their system. And so clearly he has a really good sense of tracking the individuals who are volunteering as part of Westinghouse Shore, and has a good sense of how much funding they're able to raise, or people that they're able to support each year. And so there's always the, you know, we could do better, we're doing some here. So as we think about how we're currently tracking, today's session and what we're going to go over about measurement in the next few slides is going to help kickstart your impact tracking and get you thinking about how to focus in a little bit more on some of the things that you currently track, some of the things that you could track, and what is the best way to track in terms of what you're able to, the capacity of what you're able to measure and manage. So here's where we're going to get into a little bit more of the measurement conversation. So we've done our groundwork. We've figured out the why of our organization. We've talked a little bit more about the outcomes that we want to achieve. And once we have those two building blocks in place, we want to ask ourselves 3 questions. And I would say this is something that should be done with a group of people from your organization. And you can get as many answers as you want, and you're probably going to have an overwhelming number of answers to each of these 3 questions. But the goal is to figure out what are all of the different measures that help us know if what we do is working. And once you have those types of measures, then you can pick out what are the most important measures that tell us what we do. So let me go over these 3 questions and give you a couple of examples of what they might look like. So the first question here is, how much did we do? And I should say all 3 of these questions are related to 4 big things: quantity, quality, effort, and effect. So under that how much did we do category, we're talking about quantity and effort. You're talking about, I'm going to put together 4 different next step sessions this year, and that's how much I did. I put effort into the time to design and develop them, and I know that I'm going to have 4 of them. When you look at the question of the second question here of how well did we do it, you're talking about quality and effort. So I'll keep using the example of these sessions. How well did I do it? That could be answered by a number of different things. Maybe I have a feedback form that asks people what value they got out of it. How much did they learn from each session? And maybe that knowledge gap and learning is where I want to see that quality. Maybe the quality is within the ratio of people. So we only have 5 people today, which means we're able to talk a lot more in depth on your individual organization and get some answers. And so maybe it's that back and forth of how well did we do it with giving that individualized attention, the ratio of facilitator to participants. Or it might even be opportunities to collaborate. Maybe how well we did it has nothing to do with how I'm presenting and the knowledge that I'm giving, but it has to do with giving each of the participants an opportunity to collaborate and connect with other people from other organizations. So once you have a number of those different types of things, you can think about, what do we really mean by quality? Because those are 3 different areas that could really indicate quality. The last question here is anyone better off? And it kind of spans, we see a quadrant on the screen here, and it kind of spans the 2 lower areas of the quadrants. And this is related to both quantity and effect and quality and effect. And so in the is anyone better off, you're thinking, what is the outcome from whatever effort I put in to this organization? So in terms of quantity, for these next step sessions, it might be that over the course of a year, if I have 5 people in each session, that I served a total of 5 people who were able to take that information to their organizations. But maybe in terms of quality, the measurement might be that the people who came out of these sessions made 5 new connections that really moved their organization forward. And that's important for me to know as an effect. And so it's important to think about when you go through these 3 questions, or I guess not to think about, but just to recognize that it's pretty easy to know how much you did. And it's pretty, even though there's a number of different choices you can have in quality, it's pretty easy to find a measurement for how well we did. We can always have a survey at the end of a session. We can always have different measures there. But when it comes to, is anyone better off? You're talking about things that might happen down the road. And it's harder to think about, is anyone better off? Because there's so much variation in what could happen. I might have someone in the session today that finds it very, very helpful and is able to use it and take it into their organization. But I could have someone who doesn't think this information is helpful at all. And are they better off at the end of this? That if they're not getting anything out of it, then I don't think that it's really the outcome that you want to see. And so that is a indicator for you at that point of how you can better serve those people. So in this, is anyone better off? Whenever I think about these sessions, one of the reasons I ask for people to send feedback or tell me what you want to know is because I want to make sure that these sessions are, towards is anyone better off? But it's a very difficult metric to get because it's not going to be found typically in an immediate feedback survey. It's probably going to take a little more work to get, and it's unpredictable because you're dealing with the outcomes of different people and personalities and everything that goes along with it. So always keep that in mind when you're putting together these quadrants, but know that there are ways to simplify it, and we'll go through a few examples that'll give you a better sense of how you might answer each of these questions for a few different organizations. And I forgot to mention, this is adapted from a book called Trying Hard is Not Good Enough by Mark Friedman. He's a professional who was in the area of government for a long time and found that these outcome methods, which really fall in line with measuring your impact, are the most effective and how he's seen most effective government. So some of the examples we're going to go through today are from that book. So first example of some answers to these three questions. So for a fire department, for example, the question of how much did we do might be measured by the number of responses that a fire department responds to. For their quality, maybe it's judged on their response time. If they don't get there fast enough, then they might not have the same outcome. So response time might be very important as a measure of quality. And then that last question, is anyone better off? The way that they've identified being able to measure this is, say, either number of fires kept to the room of origin or the percent of fires kept to the room of origin over a period of time. And that's important to note too, is that many of these measures you're going to want to have measured over a period of time, because if you, over the course of a year, kept a lower percentage of fires to the room of origin, you're probably going to have better outcome for the families that had to have a fire department response to an issue in their house. Another example of this is education. So with how much did we do, you might count the number of students. You had 100 students in your class for that year. Under the area of how well did we do it, you might have something like student to teacher ratio. That's that personalized time and personalized attention. And then when you answer the question of, was anyone better off, you maybe might think of what is an indicator of success for us. So maybe that's, high school graduation. So the number of high school graduates or the percentage of high school graduates might be a really good indicator of, is anyone better off? That might not get into specific stories of students, but it at least gives you a good baseline to be able to measure and figure out how to think about the outcomes that you want to see. So those are just two examples of how those three questions can really come out in different metrics. And like I said, you're probably going to go through this. You're not just going to have 4. You're not going to have 1 for each of those questions. You're probably going to have 10 or 15 for each of those questions of metrics that you could possibly track. And what you want to find are what we call indicators of impact. So you can go through that process, use that square to think about the 3 questions, and then look at all of the results that you put down, all of the metrics you could possibly count and measure, and think about what are the most important measures that demonstrate something about the results that we want to see. As you think about this, you're not only looking for what are the most important to us as an organization, that's very important, but you want to ensure that the indicators can do 3 things for you. You want them to be able to communicate well. So in that example of education, high school graduations and high school graduation rates are something that anyone who sees understands that it's good to have high levels of graduating rates from your students. And it's important when you're communicating to donors, volunteers, visitors, people who interact with your organization, to understand the importance of that metric to your organization. Second thing that indicators should do is represent something of central importance to the result you want to achieve. So we've already talked about that at the beginning, is you started with the outcome you want. As you look at all of your measurements that you pulled out, is it central to those outcomes that you identified at the beginning? And the third thing that you're going to want is for it to be a reliable and consistent source of data. Many of these points, like I said, you're going to have tracked over a certain period of time. And in order for those results to mean something, they need to be reliable and consistent, which means you're going to need a clear method of collecting that information, and you need them to be accurate when you collect those data points. So all 3 of those, if you're picking out the different metrics that you pulled out and they have all of those 3 things, then you've got a gold star indicator of impact there that will really help move your organization forward. And one of the other reasons that you want to pick indicators of impact is that many organizations don't have the capacity to collect copious amounts of data, and data is only good if you can use it. So you want to make sure you're collecting the most important points so that you can actually use that information. And maybe that's just 1 or 2 points to start. Maybe you don't have the capacity to look at any more than that. And if you're going to do that, you want to make sure that they are the most important measures that are going to demonstrate something about the results you want to see. So that's a little bit about measuring and how to pick what to measure. And now we're going to think about, now that you've looked at those areas of impact that you can measure, how do you manage that? How do you take that data and, like I said, use it in a way that your organization really is able to harness it for value in the organization? And in order to do this, you might want to think about the alignment. So your organization probably has different modes of operating. And sometimes when you're, because I've had this question before, when you're in an organization, you might have certain organizational results that you want or need to see. And those results might be somewhat different from the impact outcomes that you want to have. So you might want to take a look at the indicators that you've come up with and think about how well they align with your organizational results. And if they align well, then you're probably doing a pretty good job of ensuring your organization is working to create the most impact. And if they don't necessarily align, then maybe that indicates that you might need to change something about what you're doing within your organization in order to make those results a reality. I think that oftentimes when I get this question of, my organization, what the impact I want to make doesn't align with what my organization needs, I always think about organizations that have utility needs or building needs or staffing needs. And oftentimes those types of needs are seen as what's called overhead. And for organizations to have, this kind of back and forth of, we don't want to have too much overhead because it's not going towards the mission. If you're running a program that requires, say, case managers or facilitators or someone who is in a place that needs to coordinate all those logistics, those people are essential to the outcomes that you want to have. So sometimes organizational results or the organizational goals that we need to have in terms of maintaining and managing staff might seem like they are just overhead, but most of the time they're not just overhead. They're essential to our operations, and without them, we wouldn't be able to reach the outcomes that we want. And that really is that when you find that those people are essential to getting the indicators that you need or seeing the impact that you want, that's where you're really going to find some synergies. So always make sure that your organization is in alignment with the impact results you want. So we've already talked a little bit about data and how we use data and what it needs to be useful. We've talked about reliability, because if you are collecting information, you need it to be accurate. You also need it to be consistent. So you need to know that every time you touch that data point, that you're going to get a consistent answer. It can't fluctuate on a regular basis, or else you're going to have some inconsistent results and your accuracy is going to go down. You also are going to need to have data to be timely. So if you're collecting data once a month or once a week or whatever marker makes sense for your organization, you need to know that you can get that data in the time that you need it, and then that you can analyze it and report on it in that manner. And if you can't get data in a timely manner, it's likely that you're not going to be able to analyze or report and be able to have those results available for the people that need it, whether that's your leadership team who's working to put some goals together for your organization, or whether it's your annual report and getting that information out to donors. So when you think about collecting data, you want to make sure that the data you're collecting is reliable, consistent, and timely. And you're going to want a way to simplify your data collection, which means you're going to need to set some clear objectives about, you've already identified what are the most important measures, but what do we want to get out of those measures? If we're measuring these outcomes for 6 months, what are the objectives we hope to achieve? Or if we're measuring them for a year or 5 years, what are the objectives? And so once you have that set of goals and objectives, you're going to want to think about what types of data you need. So in the school example, they knew that they needed graduation rates, or they needed amount of kids, or they needed the ratio student to teacher. So they knew what data points they needed to hold. And there was likely a way to keep all of those pieces in a central data location. So when you do this, you want to establish a process. So you need to know, all right, who is getting information about how many students we have? Who's getting information about how many students to teachers we have? Who is tracking graduation records? What is going to happen in order to get that information? And when is that information going to be processed through? And making sure that you have that process in place really shows that you have clear roles around data, so that if there are any questions about who's doing what or where data is stored, that there are really simple answers. And oftentimes it's good to write this process down and have a clear method of tracking it, and helps with accountability as well. You're also going to want to make sure that data is stored in a central location. Not all of your data is probably going to be in one place, but you want those most important data points to be something that is set up in some sort of dashboard or Excel spreadsheet, something, even something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet when you're just starting out with data collection can be very powerful to have data together. And when you have it in a central location, you're not going to 5 different sources. I know I worked with an organization where we did an annual report and had 3 different databases where we had to pull all the information from, and we could do it, and it was simple to generate a report, but it would have been much simpler had we generated those, say, quarterly or monthly on a regular basis and stored them in a central location, whether that's a, Excel spreadsheet, or the 3 that I have here are in a KPI dashboard template, which I will share after. It's just actually, if I click on this, it'll go to it. This is something that I created and have used with organizations before, if it loads, and it's just a simple Excel spreadsheet that talks about the data type, metric description. It's very small. Let's see if I can get that bigger for you guys. Metric description, and then the different success criteria of how we've, developed it. And I have it set up on a quarterly basis. So it's just a template. You might not need all of these different data points. It's not meant to be overwhelming. It's meant to be pick and choose the things that are most important. So that will be shared after this session as well. But there are other tools that help you to simplify and centralize data as well. Google Data Studio does a good job of that and integrates nicely with Google Sheets and Excel spreadsheets. There's also an organization or system called DataBox, and I believe both of those are freeware systems as well. So there's easy and value-based economical ways to be able to store and centralize data. Lastly, just touching on why we collect data in the first place, is that data-driven stories really help your stakeholders to see your impact. So I love this description of the Lego data story is, you've got data and it's a big pile of mess. And once you sort it and arrange it, and you have all of that information in a central location, then you can think about, okay, we can present this in certain ways, or we can create a story around what this data means, or we can make it really actionable and useful for our organization. So there are so many different ways you can utilize data. And I always want to, stop here and say too, I think telling a powerful story is not just about the metrics, because we can get caught up in metrics and numbers and statistics and what those all mean for our organization. And yes, they're important, but they're important in conjunction with how they affect people. So you also are going to have that qualitative or story-based data that is going to be so meaningful for your organizations to really understand what's happening, because there are many things in life that can't be quantified with numbers. So always being able to take those data points and incorporate them with stories and that information that is very meaningful as well. So I'm going to stop there and just say that I hope that this helps you to walk away feeling better equipped to measure and manage and understand which data are important. And if you're an organization that's already tracking or somewhat tracking, I hope it helps you to focus a little bit so that you have a better process in place and it can help your organization move forward. Because that's what we try to do through these sessions, is just equip your organization with the resources you need that allow you to create a lasting impact. So I'm going to leave some information there. Stop sharing the screen, and then we'll open up to Q&A and just conversations with everyone who's here today. Let me stop the recording as well. We'll get started on conversation.